The millionaire's son only got worse, until the nanny found an object hidden under the blanket. From that moment on, nothing made sense anymore, except fear. She walked alone through the corridors of that house, connecting signs everyone chose to ignore. What she discovered in the end wasn't an illness. It was something very cruel. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. Sarah never imagined that a discreet ad in the newspaper would completely change the course of her life. A recent graduate with a degree in education, 24 years old, and with an immense desire to make a difference in someone's life, she was looking for an opportunity that was beyond the conventional. When she saw the ad asking for a caregiver for a child in New York City, something inside her whispered that she should apply. The description was vague, mentioning only a family that needed someone dedicated, patient, and willing to live on the property. The salary was generous, almost double what she could earn at any private school in the city. The interview took place in a chic cafe on the Upper East Side, far from the house where she would be working. Sarah remembered that day perfectly. She wore her best outfit, a modest ensemble her mother had helped her choose, and arrived 15 minutes early. When the man walked into the cafe, Sarah could barely hide her surprise. He was tall, with features marked by exhaustion and a sadness that seemed to dwell in his brown eyes. He looked to be around 40, but something about him conveyed a much greater age, as if he were carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. Robert Miller introduced himself in a low, hesitant voice. He explained, with carefully chosen words, that his 9-year-old son, Gabriel, was facing health problems that no doctor could fully explain. The boy had frequent episodes, moments when he would simply shut down from the world, become apathetic, refuse to eat, and experience inexplicable tremors. Hospital stays were frequent, and whenever he was in the hospital, Gabriel would improve. But upon returning home, the symptoms would come back with full force. Sarah listened to every word attentively, feeling a pang of compassion grow in her chest. Robert spoke of his wife, Emily, who had left the family 5 years earlier, under circumstances he preferred not to detail at that moment. Sarah noticed the glint of pain in his eyes when he mentioned her name and decided not to press the issue. There was something unsaid there, a mystery that hung over the family, like a dark cloud. He explained that several nannies had come and gone, but none stayed for long. They always left abruptly, without explanation, leaving Gabriel even more confused and lonely. The house was located in a secluded area of Westchester County, in a gated community surrounded by lush greenery and security. When Sarah finally arrived 3 days after accepting the offer, she couldn't contain her admiration. It was an imposing mansion with 3 floors, manicured gardens, and a pool that sparkled under the afternoon sun. But as she stepped through the front door, Sarah felt something strange. The house was beautiful, yes, but there was a palpable emptiness to the place. It was as if life had been drained from it, leaving only a hollow shell of luxury and appearances. She was greeted by Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper, a woman of about 65, with grey hair pulled back in a flawless bun, dark clothes, and an erect posture that exuded control. Her eyes were small and sharp, and Sarah got the impression she was being evaluated in every detail. Mrs. Peterson didn't smile as she greeted her, just gave a nod and indicated that Sarah should follow her. As she climbed the stairs to what would be her room, Sarah observed the silent hallways. The walls were decorated with expensive paintings, but she noticed something curious. There were no family photographs, no images of happy moments, birthdays, trips, or celebrations. It was as if the history of the house had been erased, leaving only an empty and oppressive present. Mrs. Peterson explained the house rules in a firm voice that left no room for questions. Sarah was to care for Gabriel, accompany him in his daily activities, help him with his homework, and ensure he followed the established routine. Meals were prepared exclusively by the housekeeper, who followed a strict menu based on family traditions she herself made a point of maintaining. No one, absolutely no one, was to interfere in the kitchen or try to prepare something different for the boy. Sarah found the rule odd but agreed. After all, it was her first day. Gabriel was in his room when Sarah finally met him. He was a thin boy, with dark brown hair and deep eyes that seemed to carry a sadness too old for his age. He was sitting on his bed flipping through a dinosaur book without really paying attention to the pages. When Sarah entered, he slowly looked up, evaluating her in silence. "Hi, Gabriel. My name is Sarah. I'm going to be staying here with you for a while." She tried to sound as gentle as possible, sitting in a chair near the bed. The boy didn't answer right away. He just watched her for long seconds, as if trying to decide whether she was trustworthy or not. Finally, in an almost inaudible voice, he murmured, "The others always leave." Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She didn't know what to say, because she couldn't promise something she wasn't sure she could deliver. But something about that boy, in that raw and painful vulnerability, awakened a determination in her she didn't even know she possessed. "I'm not going anywhere, Gabriel. I promise I'll stay here with you." The first few days were challenging. Gabriel was a difficult child to reach. He spent long hours in silence, drawing in his notebooks or simply staring out the window. Sarah tried to talk to him to suggest activities, but the boy seemed to be in a world of his own, protected by invisible walls she didn't yet know how to breach. Robert was rarely around. He spent most of his time in his office on the ground floor, dealing with business Sarah knew nothing about. When he emerged, he always looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, his gaze distant. He would go to Gabriel's room every night before bed, sit for a few minutes beside his son's bed, and hold his hand in silence. Sarah watched this from afar, feeling a mix of compassion and unease. There was something deeply broken in that man, something that went far beyond grief or concern for his son. Mrs. Peterson, on the other hand, was always present. She controlled every aspect of the house with almost military-like precision. She woke up before everyone else, prepared breakfast, supervised the cleaning, organized the meals, and ensured everything followed a rigid order. Sarah soon realized that the housekeeper wasn't just an employee. She was the beating heart of that house, the only thing keeping it all running. But there was something unsettling about her devotion. It was as if Mrs. Peterson wasn't just caring for the family, but also controlling it. It was in the second week that Sarah began to notice the patterns. Gabriel ate little, but whenever Mrs. Peterson served her special meals, the boy became even more apathetic. He would push his plate away, complain of nausea, and hours later, he would start to tremble. It was subtle at first. Sarah thought it was just a coincidence, but then, on a rainy Thursday, Gabriel was rushed to the hospital after a particularly severe episode. Sarah accompanied Robert and the boy, her heart aching as she watched Gabriel being carried in his father's arms, pale and weak. At the hospital, the doctors ran a series of tests, and Gabriel was admitted for 4 days. During that time, Sarah stayed by his side as much as she could, and it was there, in that hospital room, that she witnessed something extraordinary. Gabriel started to get better, not just physically but emotionally. He talked more, smiled, ate with an appetite. It was as if he were being reborn. When Sarah mentioned this to Robert, he just shook his head sadly. "It's always like this. He gets better here and gets worse at home. The doctors can't explain it." But Sarah was beginning to form her own suspicions. She couldn't get the image of Mrs. Peterson preparing those meals with such care out of her head, insisting that no one else touch Gabriel's food. There was something wrong there, something her gut was screaming at her to investigate. Back at the house, Sarah decided to observe more closely. She started taking notes in a small notebook she kept hidden in her drawer. She noted the meal times, what Gabriel ate, how he reacted, and when the episodes occurred. A pattern began to emerge, clear and disturbing. Whenever Gabriel consumed Mrs. Peterson's special soups, prepared with a broth the housekeeper claimed was a family recipe passed down through generations, the symptoms intensified. Sarah also began to notice Mrs. Peterson's behavior toward Robert. The housekeeper was overly protective, almost motherly. She prepared his meals, organized his clothes, reminded him of appointments. But there was a possessiveness to it that went beyond professional duty. It was as if she were guarding him, keeping him trapped in an invisible web of care and control. One night, when everyone was asleep, Sarah went down to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she passed through the hallway, she heard voices coming from the living room. She stopped, hiding behind a column, and recognized Mrs. Peterson's voice. The housekeeper was talking to Robert, but her tone was different from usual. There was an intimacy there, a softness Sarah had never heard before. "You need to rest, my son. I know it's hard, but you can't go on like this. Let me take care of you, like I always have." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "My son." Mrs. Peterson had called Robert her son. She knew the housekeeper had cared for him since childhood, but this seemed to go far beyond a long-standing, professional relationship. There was a possessiveness, a sense of ownership that sounded deeply disturbing. In the following days, Sarah intensified her investigation. She took advantage of the moments when Mrs. Peterson went out shopping or when Robert was engrossed in his work. She explored the pantry, checked the kitchen cabinets, looking for anything that could explain what was happening to Gabriel. And then, on a sunny afternoon, while Mrs. Peterson was out for a doctor's appointment and Robert was in a meeting in the city, Sarah found something. Hidden in a false compartment inside the spice cabinet, Sarah discovered several small vials. They contained a clear liquid and had no identifying labels. Her heart raced. She carefully picked up one of the vials, holding it up to the light. It looked harmless, but her instincts told her otherwise. Sarah took a picture with her phone, determined to find out what it was. Later, she sent the photo to a pharmacist friend, asking for absolute discretion. The reply came the next day and confirmed her worst fears. They were mild sedatives, the kind that would cause the exact symptoms Gabriel was showing: apathy, tremors, nausea, weakness. In controlled, prolonged doses, they wouldn't kill, but they would keep someone in a constant state of debility. Sarah felt the blood run cold in her veins. It couldn't be possible. Mrs. Peterson was sedating Gabriel. But why? What reason would she have to do something so horrible to a child? The answers began to form in her mind piece by piece, like a macabre puzzle. If Gabriel was always sick, always in need of care, Robert would never be able to move on with his life. He would remain trapped in that house, in that routine, in that dependency. And Mrs. Peterson would always be there, indispensable, controlling everything and everyone. Sarah knew she needed more proof before confronting anyone. She needed to understand the full extent of the manipulation, to find out what had really happened to Emily, Gabriel's mother, and why so many nannies had abandoned the job without explanation. There were layers upon layers of secrets in that house, and Sarah was determined to uncover every single one, no matter the risk to herself. Sarah spent the next few days on constant high alert, watching every move within the house. She had the proof of the hidden vials, the detailed notes, on Gabriel's behavioral patterns, but she knew she needed something more concrete, something that definitively linked Mrs. Peterson to the boy's symptoms. Confronting the housekeeper without solid evidence would be useless and potentially dangerous. Sarah noticed the increasingly watchful glances Mrs. Peterson cast in her direction, as if sensing that something was different. Gabriel, on the other hand, was starting to open up to Sarah. Slowly, like a flower blooming petal by petal, the boy began to let her into his world. He told her about his favorite dinosaurs, showed her his drawings hidden under the bed, and even smiled. When Sarah cracked a silly joke about a clumsy pterodactyl, they were small victories, but to Sarah each one was a precious treasure. One afternoon, while organizing toys in Gabriel's room, Sarah found a dusty shoebox at the back of the closet. Inside were old photographs, letters yellowed with time, and a few personal items. Gabriel was doing his homework at his desk, and Sarah took the opportunity to take a discreet look. The photos showed a beautiful woman with blonde hair and a radiant smile, holding a baby in her arms. It was Emily, Gabriel's mother. In other photos, she appeared alongside Robert, the two of them clearly in love, with that sparkle in their eyes that only true love can create. But what caught Sarah's attention most was a letter. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, and the words were smudged, as if they had been wet with tears. Sarah read it quickly, her heart racing with every line. "Robert, I can't live in this prison anymore. Mrs. Peterson controls every aspect of our lives. She won't let me be a mother to my own son. She decides what he eats, what he wears, when he sleeps, and you don't see it. You just don't see how much she manipulates us. I have to leave before I go crazy. I hope one day you'll understand and forgive me. Emily. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. So that was it. Emily hadn't abandoned her family out of disinterest or lack of love. She had fled a situation that had become unbearable. Mrs. Peterson had been exercising this control even when Gabriel's mother was present. Sarah was beginning to understand the scale of the problem. The housekeeper wasn't just manipulating the boy. She had been holding the entire family under her thumb for years. "Sarah, did you find something interesting?" Gabriel's voice startled her. The boy was looking at her with curiosity. "I found pictures of your mom. She was very beautiful," Sarah decided to be honest. "Do you remember her?" Gabriel looked down, fidgeting with his hands. "A little. She smelled like flowers and gave me big hugs. But Dad said she left because she didn't love us anymore." Sarah felt anger boil inside her. Mrs. Peterson had not only driven Emily away, but had also twisted the narrative, making Robert and Gabriel believe they had been abandoned. The manipulation was even deeper than she had imagined. "I'm sure your mom loved you very much, Gabriel. Sometimes people have to leave for reasons we can't understand, but that doesn't mean they don't love us." The boy nodded slowly, but Sarah could see the pain in his eyes. She put the box back in the closet but discreetly took the letter, folding it and putting it in her pocket. It was another piece of the puzzle. That night at dinner, Sarah watched the dynamic at the table closely. Mrs. Peterson served the special soup for Gabriel, the one she insisted only she could prepare following the family recipe. Robert ate mechanically, not really paying attention to the food or the conversation. Gabriel pushed his plate away, complaining he had no appetite. Mrs. Peterson insisted, with a voice that sounded motherly, but carried an unshakable firmness. "You need to eat, my angel. It's for your own good. Grandma's recipe always helped your father grow up strong, and it will help you too." Sarah intervened for the first time. "If he doesn't feel like it, maybe it's better not to force him. I can make him something lighter later. Maybe a sandwich, or some fruit." The silence that followed was cutting. Mrs. Peterson turned slowly to Sarah, her small eyes now narrowed into dangerous slits. "No, Gabriel's meals are prepared by me. They always have been, and they always will be. That's how things work in this house." Robert said nothing, just continued eating his soup in silence. Sarah realized he was so conditioned to obey Mrs. Peterson that he didn't even question her orders. This was more than a working relationship. It was a distorted power dynamic where the housekeeper had assumed the role of absolute matriarch. After dinner, Sarah helped Gabriel get ready for bed. The boy was pale and starting to tremble slightly. She held his hand, trying to offer comfort. "It's okay, Gabriel. I'll stay here with you until you fall asleep." "Sarah," the boy called out in a weak voice, "why does Mrs. Peterson always want me to eat that soup? It makes me feel sick." Sarah's heart ached. She couldn't lie to him, but she couldn't reveal her suspicions yet either. "Let's talk to your dad about it, okay? Maybe we can change the menu a little." But Gabriel shook his head, his eyes wide, with fear. "No, don't talk to him. She'll get mad. The other nannies tried and then they left. I don't want you to leave too." Those words confirmed what Sarah already suspected. The other nannies had noticed something was wrong and tried to intervene, and somehow Mrs. Peterson had driven them away. Sarah needed to be more careful, more strategic. She couldn't just confront the situation head-on. She needed to gather irrefutable evidence and find a way to protect Gabriel without putting herself at risk. In the days that followed, Sarah began to document everything. She made discreet audio recordings, took photos of the vials, and noted every detail of Gabriel's episodes and their correlation with his meals. She also started looking for information about Emily. Using the last name she found in the letters, Sarah managed to locate a social media profile. To her surprise, Emily was alive and living in Chicago, working as a music teacher and seeming to have rebuilt her life. Sarah hesitated for days before mustering the courage to send a message. "Hi, Emily. My name is Sarah, and I'm Gabriel's current nanny. I know this might seem strange, but I really need to talk to you about the family situation. It's urgent and concerns your son's safety." The reply came 2 days later, and it was more emotional than Sarah had expected. Emily explained that she had tried for years to maintain contact with Gabriel, but Robert had always blocked her attempts. She had fought in court, but without enough financial resources to face the expensive lawyers Robert hired, she ended up losing custody and even visitation rights. Emily revealed that Mrs. Peterson was much more than a housekeeper. She had been Robert's nanny when he was a child, and then became the housekeeper when he got married. From the beginning, Mrs. Peterson had opposed the marriage, claiming no woman would be good enough for Robert. She poisoned my life daily, Sarah. Little things that seemed insignificant but together formed a prison. She criticized how I cared for Gabriel, interfered in every decision, and Robert always took her side. It was like I was an intruder in my own family. When Gabriel started getting sick, and she insisted on controlling all his food, I started to suspect something. But when I tried to talk to Robert, he accused me of being paranoid and jealous. I couldn't take it anymore and I left. It was the worst decision of my life because I left my son in her hands, but I was mentally destroyed. You have to protect Gabriel, Sarah. Please don't let her do to him what she did to me. Sarah read and reread the message, tears streaming down her face. Emily wasn't the villain of the story. She was another victim. And now Sarah had confirmation that her suspicions were correct. Mrs. Peterson was indeed sedating Gabriel, keeping him sick to ensure Robert remained dependent on her, trapped in that house, in that routine. But Sarah still needed a plan. She couldn't just accuse Mrs. Peterson without proof, and Robert was so conditioned to trust the housekeeper that he probably wouldn't believe her without concrete evidence. Sarah decided she needed to do something riskier. She needed to collect a sample of the soup Mrs. Peterson prepared and have it fully analyzed by a lab. The next morning, while Mrs. Peterson was busy upstairs organizing clothes, Sarah snuck into the kitchen. The pot with the special soup was still on the stove, cooling. With trembling hands, Sarah took a small glass jar she had brought from her room and collected a generous sample. She quickly sealed the jar and hid it in her purse. "What are you doing?" Sarah froze. Mrs. Peterson's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. She turned around slowly, trying to maintain her composure. "I was just getting a glass of water." Mrs. Peterson's eyes pierced her, suspicious and sharp. "You've been very curious lately, Sarah. Be careful not to cross lines you shouldn't." It sounded like a clear threat. Sarah swallowed hard, clutching her purse tightly. "I'm just doing my job, Mrs. Peterson. Taking care of Gabriel. Then just take care of him, and don't meddle in matters that don't concern you." The housekeeper turned her back and went upstairs, but Sarah could still feel the weight of her gaze. That afternoon, Sarah took the sample to a private lab, paying out of her own pocket for an urgent analysis. The results would be back in 48 hours. In the meantime, she had to stay calm and not raise any more suspicion. But something had changed in the atmosphere of the house. Mrs. Peterson was now watching her constantly. Her movements tracked, her conversations with Gabriel interrupted. The tension was palpable, and Sarah knew she was running out of time. Gabriel had another severe episode that night. Sarah stayed by his side in his room, holding his hand as he trembled and cried softly. She promised herself she wouldn't let this continue. No matter what it took, she would expose the truth and free this family from Mrs. Peterson's suffocating control. But what Sarah didn't know was that the housekeeper was also making her own plans, and that the storm on the horizon would be far more intense than she could ever imagine. Sarah couldn't sleep. That night, lying in her bed in the room next to Gabriel's, she mentally replayed every detail she had uncovered. The lab report was tucked away in a folder hidden at the bottom of her suitcase, along with the photos of the vials and her detailed notes. It was concrete proof, yes, but she knew she would need much more to fully convince Robert and to ensure Gabriel would be protected. What bothered her most was the conversation she'd had with Emily. Robert's ex-wife had mentioned something that echoed in Sarah's mind. "She did horrible things to drive me away. Things I could never prove, but I knew came from her." What things? Sarah needed to know more about the family's past, to understand just how far Mrs. Peterson's manipulation went. The next morning, Sarah woke up determined. While Mrs. Peterson was busy with household chores, and Gabriel was watching cartoons in the living room, she took the opportunity to explore areas of the mansion she hadn't yet investigated. The attic seemed the most promising place. Robert had casually mentioned days ago that old family belongings were stored there, things he didn't have the heart to go through. Climbing the narrow stairs to the attic was like stepping into a time capsule. The space was large, lit only by a dusty window, and filled with boxes, furniture covered in white sheets, and old trunks. Sarah began her methodical search, carefully opening each box, looking for anything that might shed light on the family's history. It was in a dark wooden trunk, locked with a rusty padlock that Sarah had to break with a tool she found nearby, that she discovered the most disturbing treasure. Inside were dozens of letters, all written by Emily, but which had apparently never been sent. Sarah picked one up and began to read, her heart aching with every word. "Robert, I tried calling today, but you didn't answer. Mrs. Peterson said you were too busy. She always says that. I need to talk to you about Gabriel. He's different when I come back from my work trips, more distant, more scared. When I ask him what happened, he looks at Mrs. Peterson with fear and doesn't answer. Robert, please, listen to me this time. Something is very wrong." Sarah moved on to another letter, dated a few months later. "I found medicine in Gabriel's room. That wasn't prescribed by any doctor. When I confronted Mrs. Peterson, she said they were special vitamins, that you had approved them. But when I asked you, you knew nothing about it. You said I was imagining things, that Mrs. Peterson would never do something like that. Robert, I'm desperate. I feel like I'm losing my son and my husband at the same time, and she's there, always there, controlling everything, deciding everything." The following letters were even more distressing. Emily described how Mrs. Peterson had spread rumors to her friends, saying she was a neglectful mother, how the housekeeper would invent commitments for Robert on days the couple had planned to spend time together, how she would accidentally ruin Emily's clothes in the laundry, forget to pass on important messages, and carry out small acts of sabotage that seemed innocent in isolation, but together formed a clear pattern of destruction. Sarah also found a diary, this one in Mrs. Peterson's own handwriting. The pages were filled with neat script, and the content made Sarah's blood run cold. The housekeeper wrote about Robert as if he were her real son, her boy, her reason for living. There were entries dating back to when he was still a child, shortly after losing his mother. "Today Robert called me Mum for the first time. My heart overflowed with happiness. He is mine now. It doesn't matter that he didn't come from my womb. He is my son in every way that matters. I will dedicate every second of my life to caring for him, to molding him, to ensuring he never needs anyone but me." The entries continued over the years, documenting every phase of Robert's life. But the tone changed drastically when he met Emily. The words became bitter, resentful. "He brought that woman home today. She's pretty, I'll admit, but I can see right through her. She wants to take him from me. She wants to steal my son, but I won't allow it. I will never allow it. I have to be smart, patient. I have to show him slowly that she is not suitable for our family." Sarah flipped through the pages quickly, reaching the period after Gabriel's birth. "The baby was born. Robert is ecstatic, but I see an opportunity here. If the child needs constant care, if there are complications, Robert will need me more than ever, and Emily. She won't have the strength to handle a difficult child. She will give up. They always give up." Sarah's hands trembled as she read. It was all documented there. The obsession, the planning, the systematic manipulation. Mrs. Peterson wasn't just a controlling housekeeper. She was someone who had built an alternate reality in her own mind, where she was the true matriarch of the family, and anyone who threatened that position had to be eliminated. Sarah photographed several pages of the diary and some of Emily's letters with her phone. It was devastating evidence, impossible to ignore. But as she was putting everything back in the trunk, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Her heart pounded. Someone was coming up. Sarah hid behind an old wardrobe, holding her breath. The attic door creaked open, and Mrs. Peterson entered, carrying a box. The housekeeper walked directly to the trunk Sarah had just closed, as if she knew exactly where she was going. She placed the box on the floor and took out a key that hung from a chain around her neck, a key Sarah hadn't noticed before. Mrs. Peterson opened the trunk and began to rummage through the papers inside, checking if everything was in its place. Sarah could see her from her hiding spot, and what she saw on her face was disturbing. The housekeeper caressed the letters and the diary with an almost reverent tenderness, as if they were sacred objects. She was murmuring something softly, words Sarah couldn't quite make out, but that sounded like a prayer or a mantra. After a few minutes that felt like hours, Mrs. Peterson put everything back, locked the trunk, and went back downstairs. Sarah waited a long time before emerging from her hiding place, her heart still hammering in her chest. She had narrowly escaped being discovered, and now she knew that Mrs. Peterson visited that trunk regularly, probably to relive her manipulations and feed her obsession. When Sarah finally came down from the attic, her legs could barely support her. She went straight to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, trying to calm down. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a different woman from the one who had arrived at that house weeks ago. There was a new determination in her eyes, but also fear. She was dealing with something far more complex and dangerous than she had initially imagined. The rest of the day passed in a haze of tension. Sarah tried to act normal, but she felt Mrs. Peterson's gaze on her constantly. During lunch, the housekeeper made a seemingly casual comment that made Sarah's blood run cold. "You know, Sarah, some people don't know how to respect others' privacy. They go snooping where they shouldn't, looking for things that don't concern them. It never ends well for those people." Sarah swallowed hard but maintained her composure. "I completely agree, Mrs. Peterson. Privacy is very important." The look the housekeeper gave her was one of pure defiance. She knew. Somehow she knew Sarah had been in the attic. Maybe she had left something out of place, or maybe Mrs. Peterson just had a sixth sense for these things. But the message was clear. Sarah was being watched, and any misstep could have consequences. That afternoon, while Gabriel was doing his homework, Sarah received a text from an unknown number. "Get out of that house while you can. You don't know what you're dealing with. The others tried and regretted it. Don't make the same mistake." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly replied, "Who is this?" The answer came a few minutes later. "I was Gabriel's nanny before you. I stayed for 3 months. I tried to help, tried to show Robert what was happening. Mrs. Peterson found out and, well, let's just say she has ways of making someone's life very difficult. I had to run out in the middle of the night. I'm still scared of her. Be careful." Sarah asked for more details, but the person never replied again. She tried to trace the number, but it was from a prepaid phone that was soon turned off. This only confirmed what Sarah already suspected. Mrs. Peterson had a history of driving away anyone who posed a threat to her control over the family. That night, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't do this alone anymore. She needed help, someone she could trust completely. She called her best friend Jessica, who was a lawyer in New York. She told her everything, from the beginning, showing her the photos of the evidence over a video call. Jessica listened in silence, her expression growing more and more grave. "Sarah, you're in a very delicate situation." "What this woman is doing is psychological manipulation on an extreme level. But the problem is she's smart. Everything she does leaves little concrete evidence. The sedatives could be explained away as medicine administered with good intentions. The diary could be seen as the fantasies of a lonely woman. You need something more, something undeniable." "Like what?" Sarah was desperate. "You need a witness, someone who lived through it and is willing to talk. Maybe Emily? Maybe one of the other nannies? And you need to make Robert truly open his eyes, not just see the evidence, but feel the truth." Sarah knew Jessica was right, but how could she do that without putting Gabriel at risk? How could she expose Mrs. Peterson without giving her time to do more damage? The next day, Sarah had a deep conversation with Gabriel. The boy was having a better, more lucid day, and she seized the moment. They were in the garden, far from prying ears. "Gabriel, can I ask you a question? And I need you to be very honest with me, okay?" The boy looked at her with those deep eyes and nodded. "Has Mrs. Peterson ever told you not to tell your dad things, or not to talk about what happens when you're alone with her?" Gabriel was very quiet for a long moment. Sarah could see the struggle happening inside him, between fear and the desire to finally tell the truth. Finally, in a voice so low Sarah had to lean in to hear, he said, "She says that if I tell anything, Dad will get really mad at me. She says the medicine she gives me is special, that it helps Dad not be sad. She says if I don't take it, Dad might get so sad that he'll want to leave too, like Mom did." Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. This child was being emotionally manipulated in such a cruel way, carrying a burden no child should ever have to bear. She hugged Gabriel tightly. "None of that is true, sweetie. None of it. Your dad loves you more than anything in this world, and he will never ever be mad at you for telling the truth. And your mom didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because she was being hurt, just like you're being hurt now. But we're going to change that. I promise we're going to change that." Gabriel began to cry, releasing years of pain, confusion, and fear. Sarah held him, rocking him gently, letting him pour out everything he had kept inside for so long. When he finally calmed down, she wiped his tears and looked directly into his eyes. "Do you trust me?" "Yes." "Then I need you to be very brave. I need you to tell your dad everything you just told me. I'll be right by your side. I'll hold your hand, but the words need to come from you. Can you do that?" Gabriel hesitated, the fear still visible on his face, but then slowly he nodded. "I can. For you, Sarah. I can." Sarah knew this would be the decisive moment. Gabriel's testimony, combined with all the evidence she had gathered, would be impossible for Robert to ignore, but she also knew that Mrs. Peterson would not go down without a fight, and that the next few days would be the most dangerous of all. As they walked back into the house, Sarah saw Mrs. Peterson watching them from the kitchen window. The housekeeper's gaze was cold, calculating, and Sarah knew in that moment that the final confrontation was approaching. There would be no more room for subtlety or secret investigations. Soon, everything would come to light, and the truth, however painful, would finally be revealed. The 3 days following Sarah's conversation with Gabriel were the most tense she had ever experienced. Mrs. Peterson seemed to be everywhere at once, her oppressive presence looming over every corner of the house. Sarah constantly felt the weight of the housekeeper's gaze, as if being watched by a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. On the first morning, Sarah woke up to find all her clothes scattered across her bedroom floor. The drawers were open, her belongings rummaged through. Her heart pounded. Someone had been in her room during the night while she slept. The message was clear: "You are not safe, even in your sleep." Sarah frantically checked to see if the folder with the evidence was still hidden. It was there, but someone had clearly been looking for something. A shiver ran down her spine. During breakfast, Mrs. Peterson was particularly solicitous, serving Sarah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Didn't you sleep well, dear? You look so tired. Perhaps you need some calming tea. I have a special recipe that has always worked wonders." Sarah politely declined, but the veiled threat did not go unnoticed. The housekeeper was making it clear that she knew how to prepare substances, that she had access to Sarah's food too, that she could do to her what she was doing to Gabriel. The psychological game was escalating. That afternoon, as Sarah was taking Gabriel to his room for his activities, she found a folded note under her pillow. The message, written in a handwriting she didn't recognize, was short but disturbing. "The other nannies also thought they could be heroes. Ask them where they are now. Leave before it's too late." Sarah's hands trembled as she held the paper. How had it gotten there? Who had been in her room? Was it Mrs. Peterson trying to scare her, or was someone else involved? Paranoia began to set in, and Sarah realized that was exactly the point. To make her doubt herself, to make her feel afraid, to make her give up. She called Jessica again that night, whispering from the bathroom with the faucet running to muffle her voice. "I'm starting to think I can't do this, Jess. She's inside my head. She's making me feel like I'm going crazy." That's exactly what she wants, Sarah. She's using classic psychological manipulation tactics: intimidation, invasion of privacy, veiled threats. But you're not crazy. You have real proof. You have the lab report, the photos, the diary. Don't let her win. What if something happens to me? What if she does something to me like she did to Gabriel? Then you need to act fast. You can't wait any longer. Talk to Robert tomorrow. Show him everything. And if you have to, get out of that house and report everything to the authorities. Sarah knew Jessica was right, but the fear was paralyzing. She had never dealt with anything like this before, never faced someone so manipulative and determined. But then she thought of Gabriel, of his frightened eyes, of how he had gathered the courage to trust her. She couldn't abandon him now. The next day, Sarah finally got a moment alone with Robert. He had taken the morning off from work to handle personal matters, and Mrs. Peterson had left for a routine doctor's appointment. It was now or never. Sarah knocked on the door of Robert's office, her heart hammering against her ribs. When he invited her in, she saw that he looked more tired than ever. There were folders scattered across his desk, and he was holding his head in his hands. "Robert, I need to talk to you. It's about Gabriel, about the house, about everything." He looked up, and Sarah saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. It was as if he, too, was at his breaking point, as if something inside him knew the truth was about to explode. "I know I need to listen, I know. Listen. I've been avoiding this for too long. Please sit down." Sarah pulled up a chair and began. This time she spared no details. She showed him the lab report, the photos of the vials, the pages from Mrs. Peterson's diary, Emily's letters. She told him about the testimony from the previous nanny, about the threatening note, about the intimidation tactics. And finally, with a choked voice, she told him about the conversation she'd had with Gabriel, about how the boy had been emotionally manipulated for years. Robert listened in silence, but Sarah could see the emotions flashing across his face: disbelief, shock, pain, anger. When she finished, he was very quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across his desk, as if he were seeing a macabre puzzle finally come together. "I knew." His voice came out as a broken whisper. "Deep down, I always knew something was wrong. But it was easier to pretend I didn't see it. Mrs. Peterson has been here since my mother passed away. I was only 5, Sarah. She comforted me. She raised me. She was the only constant in my life. How could I question that? You're not to blame for trusting her, Robert. She manipulated you since you were a child. It's called conditioning. She shaped your reality." Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden without really seeing anything. "I was so in love with Emily. When I met her, I thought I had finally found my real family, but Mrs. Peterson was always there, always interfering, always creating friction between us, and I was always in the middle, trying to keep them both happy and never succeeding." He turned to Sarah, and there were tears streaming down his face. "When Emily left, I blamed her. I thought she was weak, that she hadn't fought for our family. But the truth is, I never fought for her. I never had the courage to stand up to Mrs. Peterson, to set boundaries, to protect my wife and my son, and now Gabriel is paying the price for my cowardice." Sarah stood up and gently touched his arm. "You weren't a coward, Robert. You were trapped in a dynamic that began when you were a vulnerable child. But now you can change it. Now you can protect your son. What if it's too late? What if I've already caused irreparable damage? It's never too late to do the right thing. Gabriel is still young. He can heal. Your family can heal. But only if you have the courage to act now." Robert wiped his tears and nodded slowly. "What do I need to do?" Before Sarah could answer, they heard screams from upstairs. It was Gabriel. Sarah and Robert raced to the boy's room and found a terrifying scene. Gabriel was on the floor, convulsing, his eyes rolled back, foam coming from his mouth. Mrs. Peterson was standing beside him, holding an empty bowl, her expression one of feigned horror. "I don't know what happened. He was eating his soup and suddenly he started getting sick." Sarah knelt beside Gabriel, turning him on his side to prevent him from choking. Robert was already dialing 911, his voice desperate as he described the situation. Sarah looked at the bowl Mrs. Peterson was still holding, and then at the housekeeper. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw something there that made her blood run cold. There was no real concern, no genuine despair. There was only cold calculation. Mrs. Peterson had increased the dose, drastically. This was no longer about keeping Gabriel sick. It was about sending a message. It was about showing that she still had control, that she still had power, that she could do whatever she wanted. The ambulance arrived in 15 minutes that felt like an eternity. The paramedics stabilized Gabriel and rushed him to the hospital. Robert went in the ambulance with his son, and Sarah took her car to follow them. Mrs. Peterson tried to go too, but Robert, for the first time, stopped her. "You stay here. I don't want you near my son right now." The look of shock on Mrs. Peterson's face was almost comical. She had never been rejected by Robert before, never been left behind, but he was firm, getting into the ambulance without a backward glance. At the hospital, while Gabriel was being treated in the emergency room, Robert broke down. Sarah held him as he cried, all the pain of years of manipulation finally surfacing. "I almost lost my son. Because of my blindness, because of my weakness. I almost lost my son." "But you didn't lose him. He's being taken care of now, and you're waking up to the truth. That's what matters." The doctors came to speak with them a few hours later. Gabriel had been sedated to dangerous levels, but they had managed to stabilize him in time. He would be kept for observation, but was expected to recover. The lead physician, Dr. Davis, a middle-aged man with a concerned expression, asked to speak with Robert privately. Sarah waited outside but could hear parts of the conversation through the ajar door. Dr. Davis was saying that he suspected intentional poisoning, that the levels of sedatives in Gabriel's blood were not consistent with accidental administration or even self-medication by a child. He asked Robert if there was anyone in the house who had access to the boy's food and medication. Sarah saw Robert through the crack in the door. He was sitting, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Finally, he told the doctor everything. About Mrs. Peterson, about the suspicions, about the evidence Sarah had gathered. Dr. Davis listened with growing seriousness and then said he would have to report the case to the proper authorities, that it was his duty to protect the child. Robert agreed. "Do whatever is necessary. I just want my son to be safe." When Robert came out of the room, he looked 10 years older, but there was also a new clarity in his eyes. He looked at Sarah and said in a firm voice, "We're going to fix this today. We're going to end this once and for all." Sarah nodded. She knew the final confrontation had arrived. There was no more avoiding it, no more postponing it. But this time she wasn't alone. She had Robert by her side, and together they were stronger than Mrs. Peterson's manipulation. While they waited for Gabriel to wake up, Sarah received a text from Jessica. Her friend had done more research and discovered something important. 2 of the previous nannies had agreed to talk and were willing to give their testimonies about what they had experienced in that house. One of them, named Beatrice, had been threatened by Mrs. Peterson so intensely that she had to seek psychological help after leaving the job. Sarah showed the text to Robert. "It's not just us. Other people saw what was happening. There's a pattern. There's a history." Robert held Sarah's hand, and she could feel him trembling, but also his determination. "Thank you for not giving up, for being brave when I couldn't be, for saving my son when I was too blind to see he needed saving. You're being brave now, too, and that's what matters." Gabriel woke up around dusk, confused but stable. When he saw his father and Sarah by his side, he started to cry. "I didn't want to eat the soup, but she said Dad would be mad if I didn't. She said you would leave me if I didn't obey." Robert hugged his son with an intensity that made Sarah have to turn away to hide her own tears. "I will never, ever leave you, my son, and you will never again have to do anything you don't want to do. I promise, I swear." That night, while Gabriel slept in the hospital with Robert by his side, Sarah returned to the house. She knew Mrs. Peterson would be there, waiting, and she was right. The housekeeper was sitting in the living room, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. "So, you've won," Mrs. Peterson said, as Sarah walked in. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a competition, Mrs. Peterson. It was about protecting an innocent child. "You don't understand anything. You don't know what it's like to dedicate your entire life to a family and get nothing in return. You don't know what it's like to love so much it hurts. I know what love is, and I know that real love doesn't hurt, it doesn't control, it doesn't destroy. What you feel isn't love, it's obsession, and it's ending now. Mrs. Peterson stood up slowly, and for the first time since Sarah had met her, she looked fragile, broken. "Where will I go? This has been my home for 40 years. This is my family." "It's not your family, Mrs. Peterson." "It never was, and it's time for you to understand that." The housekeeper walked to the door, stopping only to look at Sarah one last time. "You think you've fixed everything, but you'll find that some things are impossible to fix. The scars I've left on them will last forever." And with that she walked out into the night, leaving Sarah alone in that enormous house, and finally, for the first time in weeks, at peace. But Sarah knew the real battle was yet to come, not the battle against Mrs. Peterson, but the battle for Gabriel's and Robert's healing. And that would be a long, painful but necessary journey. The lab results arrived 2 days later, confirming all of Sarah's suspicions. The soup contained significant amounts of benzodiazepines, a type of sedative that, when administered continuously, caused the exact symptoms Gabriel was exhibiting. Sarah held the report in her trembling hands, feeling a mix of validation and horror. She had the proof. Now she had to decide how to use this information without putting Gabriel or herself in danger. The first person Sarah decided to approach was Robert. She knew it would be difficult to make him see the truth. He had trusted Mrs. Peterson since he was a child. She had been his mother figure after his own mother passed away early. Breaking that trust would be like tearing out the foundations of his entire life. But Sarah had no choice. Gabriel depended on her. She waited until Mrs. Peterson left for her weekly grocery shopping. It was one of the few times the housekeeper left the house for a few hours. Sarah seized the moment and knocked on the door of Robert's office. He was sitting behind a massive desk, surrounded by papers and documents, with that tired expression that never seemed to leave his face. "Robert, I need to talk to you about Gabriel. It's important." He looked up, surprised by her serious tone. "Did something happen? Did he have another episode?" Sarah took a deep breath and entered, closing the door behind her. She placed the lab report on the desk along with her detailed notes and the photos of the vials she had found. "Robert, there's something very wrong happening in this house, and I know it will be hard to hear what I'm about to say, but I need you to listen to me until the end." In the minutes that followed, Sarah told him everything, from the patterns she had observed between Mrs. Peterson's meals and Gabriel's episodes, to the discovery of the hidden vials and the lab results. She told him about the letter from Emily she had found, about the conversations she'd had with her, and how everything indicated that Mrs. Peterson was deliberately keeping Gabriel sick. Robert listened to her in silence, but Sarah could see the battle raging within him. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, his jaw tensed, his eyes shifting between disbelief and something that looked like fear. When she finished, the silence that fell was deafening. "This can't be true." Robert shook his head, his voice coming out hoarse. "Mrs. Peterson raised me. She took care of me when my mother was gone. She would never do something like this. Robert, I know how hard this must be for you, but look at the evidence. The report is clear. Gabriel is being sedated, and it only happens when he eats her meals." "Emily used to say things like that too." Robert stood up abruptly, starting to pace. She was paranoid, jealous. She couldn't accept that Mrs. Peterson knew Gabriel better than she did. Sarah felt her frustration grow but remained calm. "Robert, your wife wasn't paranoid. She was seeing exactly what I'm seeing now. Mrs. Peterson controls every aspect of this house, and she keeps Gabriel sick to ensure you can never move on. She needs you to depend on her." The words hit Robert like punches. He stopped pacing and leaned on the desk, his breathing heavy. Sarah could see tears forming in the corners of his eyes. "I can't believe this. If it's true, then everything in my life has been a lie. Everything. I know it's devastating, but you have to think about Gabriel. He's being harmed, and it will only get worse if we don't act now." Robert was silent for long minutes, processing everything. Finally, he looked up at Sarah, and there was a new determination there mixed with pain. "What do you suggest we do?" Sarah had already thought about it. "We need to confront her, but carefully, and we need a plan to protect Gabriel. Maybe it's better to do it with other people present. Maybe a doctor, someone who can be a witness. Before Robert could answer, they heard the sound of the front door opening. Mrs. Peterson was back earlier than expected. Sarah and Robert exchanged a panicked look. She quickly gathered the papers and hid them inside a folder, while Robert tried to compose his expression. Mrs. Peterson appeared at the office door moments later, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. "Were you having a meeting?" Her voice was cordial, but there was a poorly disguised suspicion. "We were just discussing Gabriel's progress," Sarah tried to sound casual. "How wonderful. And how is my boy?" The way she said, "my boy," made the hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. "He's resting." Sarah stood up, determined to get out of there before the tension became unbearable. In the following days, Sarah and Robert spoke in secret whenever possible. They decided the best course of action was to schedule an appointment with a trusted doctor, someone unconnected to Gabriel's hospital history, and bring all the evidence. But Mrs. Peterson seemed to sense that something was different. She intensified her surveillance, was always nearby, always watching, always interfering. Gabriel, meanwhile, was getting worse. The doses in his soup seemed to have increased, and the boy spent most of his time drowsy and confused. Sarah couldn't stand to see it anymore. One night, as she was putting Gabriel to bed, she made an impulsive decision. She wouldn't wait any longer. She would confront Mrs. Peterson that very night. Robert had left for a work engagement and wouldn't be back until late. Sarah knew this would be her only chance. She tucked Gabriel into bed, making sure he was comfortable, and went downstairs, her heart pounding in her chest. Mrs. Peterson was in the kitchen preparing the next day's dinner. "Mrs. Peterson, I need to talk to you." Sarah's voice came out firmer than she expected. The housekeeper turned slowly, a kitchen knife still in her hand. "About what, dear?" Sarah didn't back down. "About what you're doing to Gabriel." The air in the kitchen seemed to instantly turn cold. Mrs. Peterson placed the knife on the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked towards Sarah with measured steps. "I don't know what you're talking about. I know about the sedatives. I know you're putting substances in his food. I have proof, Mrs. Peterson. I know everything." For a moment, something flickered across the housekeeper's face. It wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was something far more disturbing. It was pure defiance. "You don't know anything, girl. You're just another one who thinks she can come in here and change things. But this is my house. This is my family. Gabriel is not your son. Robert is not your son. You are just the housekeeper." The words landed like a slap. Mrs. Peterson took a step forward, her eyes now as cold as ice. "I raised Robert since he was 5 years old. I was there for every important moment of his life. I am more of a mother to him than the woman who gave birth to him and left. And Gabriel, he is my grandson in everything but blood. Emily was never worthy of this family. She wanted to get rid of me, to push me away from Robert. But I knew she wouldn't last, and she didn't. So you admit it? You admit you deliberately drove Emily away?" Mrs. Peterson smiled, and it was the most terrifying smile Sarah had ever seen. "I did what needed to be done to protect my family. Robert was losing himself in that marriage. He was forgetting who really mattered. Emily was weak. She ran away just like I knew she would. And Gabriel. Why are you doing this to an innocent child?" Mrs. Peterson's expression changed, becoming almost motherly. "Gabriel needs special care. He's fragile, delicate, and Robert needs to be here taking care of him, not getting distracted by other things, other people. If Gabriel is well, Robert might decide to move on, maybe even find another woman. And then where would I be? After everything I've done, all the years I've dedicated to this family, would I be discarded? Like old trash?" Mrs. Peterson's twisted logic was shocking. She truly believed she was protecting the family, when in fact she was slowly destroying it. Sarah felt nausea rise in her stomach. "You are harming a child to satisfy your need for control. That's not love, Mrs. Peterson, that's a sickness." "No." Mrs. Peterson shook her head, her voice now thick with emotion. "This is dedication. This is sacrifice. I gave up having my own family to take care of this one. Robert is all I have. Gabriel is all I have. And I will not let anyone, least of All an arrogant little girl like you destroy what I have built." Sarah took a step back, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control. Mrs. Peterson advanced another step, her eyes gleaming with a disturbing intensity. The other nannies understood quickly. They left when they realized they had no place here. "But you're stubborn. You think you can save everyone, but you can't, Sarah. You're just another one who will run away when things get too hard." "I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to tell Robert everything. I'm going to give the evidence to the authorities. Gabriel will be protected." Mrs. Peterson laughed, but it was a joyless sound. "Robert will never believe you. He's known me for almost 40 years. You've been here for a few weeks. Who do you think he'll choose? He already knows everything. I've already shown him the proof." The change in Mrs. Peterson was instantaneous. Her face, which until then had maintained a frigid composure, twisted into a mask of fury and panic. "You did what?" "He knows about the sedatives. He knows you're keeping Gabriel sick. And he knows you're the one who drove Emily away." Mrs. Peterson stood paralyzed for a moment, processing the information. Then slowly something inside her seemed to break. Her shoulders slumped, her face crumpled, and tears began to stream down her wrinkled cheeks. "I just wanted to be loved. I just wanted to have a family. Is that so wrong?" Sarah felt a pang of compassion but didn't let it sway her from her purpose. "It's not wrong to want that, Mrs. Peterson, but the way you're doing it is hurting innocent people." At that moment they heard the front door open. Robert was back early. He walked into the kitchen and saw the two women, the tension palpable in the air. He looked at Mrs. Peterson, and this time his gaze didn't hold its usual adoration. It held disappointment, pain, and determination. "Mrs. Peterson, is it true? Is everything Sarah told me true?" Mrs. Peterson looked at the man she had raised, the man she considered her son, and saw that she had lost. Denial would no longer work. The tears continued to fall, but now she didn't try to hide them. "I did everything for you, Robert. Everything was always for you." And that was all he needed to hear. The days following, the confrontation were the most difficult that House had ever witnessed. Robert, after hearing Mrs. Peterson's confession, made a decision that would change everything. He asked the housekeeper to leave the house immediately. There was no shouting, no violence, just a quiet firmness that cut deeper than any angry words could. Mrs. Peterson tried to argue, to plead, to explain, but Robert remained resolute. The woman who had raised him, whom he considered his second mother, had betrayed his trust in the most profound way possible. Sarah helped Mrs. Peterson pack her bags, and it was a painful process to watch. The housekeeper cried silently as she packed her clothes and personal belongings. At one point she stopped and looked at Sarah with red, swollen eyes. "You'll never understand, Sarah. You'll never know what it's like to give up everything for a family that isn't yours. I didn't have children because I dedicated my life to them, and now I'm thrown away as if I never mattered." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. "I understand that you sacrificed a lot, Mrs. Peterson, but true sacrifice doesn't come with expectations of control or possession. You loved in a way that hurt, and that's not real love." Mrs. Peterson didn't reply. She just continued packing her things, a lifetime reduced to a few suitcases. When she was finished, Robert escorted her to a taxi that would take her to a cousin's house in Albany. He gave her an envelope with enough money for a few months, but made it clear that the bond was broken. There would be no reconciliation. There would be no going back. When the taxi drove away, Robert stood in the doorway, watching until the vehicle disappeared completely. Sarah stood by his side in respectful silence. Finally, he turned to her, and tears were streaming freely down his face. "I was a coward, Sarah. I knew something was wrong for years. But it was easier to pretend everything was fine, easier to let Mrs. Peterson control everything, easier not to face the truth. And in the process, I lost my wife, almost lost my son, and wasted years of my life living in a prison I helped build myself." Sarah gently touched his arm. "You're not a coward, Robert. You were trapped in a dynamic that started when you were just a child. Mrs. Peterson shaped the way you saw the world, the way you saw relationships. Breaking free from that takes immense courage, and you're doing it now." In the following days, Gabriel began to improve remarkably. Without the sedatives in his food, his energy gradually returned. The color came back to his face, the sparkle to his eyes. He started eating better, sleeping better, playing more. It was as if he were waking up from a long nightmare. And with each passing day, Sarah saw the boy he truly was emerge. Curious, smart, affectionate. One afternoon, while Gabriel was drawing in the living room, Robert finally gathered the courage to do something he had been avoiding for 5 years. He picked up the phone and called Emily. The conversation was difficult, filled with heavy silences and tears on both sides. Robert apologized for not believing her, for choosing Mrs. Peterson over his own wife, for letting her leave without a fight. Emily cried, but she also listened, and by the end of the call, they had agreed to meet. The reunion between Emily and Gabriel took place a week later, in a park in the city. Sarah accompanied Robert and Gabriel, offering emotional support. When Emily appeared, walking nervously down the stone path, Gabriel recognized her immediately. He froze for a moment, processing the sight of the mother he hadn't seen in 5 years. Then, as if a dam had broken, he ran toward her. Emily knelt and opened her arms, and when Gabriel reached her, she hugged him with a force that contained 5 years of longing, guilt, and unexpressed love. They both cried, and Sarah couldn't hold back her tears either. Robert watched the scene from a distance, his face a mixture of relief and remorse. "I'm sorry, Mom, I'm sorry for believing. You didn't love me," Gabriel sobbed against Emily's shoulder. "My love, it was never your fault, never ever your fault. I love you more than anything in this world. I just didn't know how to protect you back then. But now I'm going to do everything differently, I promise." In the weeks that followed, the family began a delicate process of rebuilding. Emily didn't move back into the house immediately. Everyone agreed that would be too soon. But she started visiting Gabriel regularly, taking him on outings, participating in his activities, and reconnecting with the son she had been forced to leave. Robert and Emily also started couples therapy, working through the deep wounds Mrs. Peterson had inflicted on their relationship. Sarah witnessed all these changes with a profound sense of fulfillment, but she knew that at some point she would have to make a decision about her own future. Gabriel no longer needed a caregiver in the same way. He had his mother back, his father was more present, and the family dynamic was healing. One evening, as she was tucking Gabriel into bed, the boy surprised her with a question. "Sarah, are you going to leave now that my mom is back?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "Eventually, yes, but not because I don't care about you, Gabriel. It's because you don't need me the way you did before. You have your family back, and that's a beautiful thing." Gabriel's eyes filled with tears. "But you're part of my family, too. You saved me. And you taught me things I'll never forget." Sarah hugged the boy. "But now it's time for you to live your life with the people who have always loved you. Your mom, your dad, they're here now. And they won't let anything bad happen again. Do you promise you'll visit?" "I promise." 2 months later, Sarah began to transition out. She stayed at the house only a few days a week, allowing Emily to gradually take on the primary role in Gabriel's care. The relationship between Robert and Emily was also evolving slowly. They hadn't gotten back together yet, but they were working on it, rebuilding the trust that Mrs. Peterson had destroyed. Robert offered Sarah a generous sum as a thank you for everything she had done, but Sarah refused to accept more than her agreed-upon salary. She hadn't done it for the money. She did it because it was the right thing to do. But she did accept the glowing letter of recommendation Robert wrote, and she knew that this experience had profoundly transformed her as a person and as a professional. On her last night at the house, the family threw a special farewell dinner. Emily cooked, and it was the first time in years that a meal in that house was prepared with genuine love instead of manipulative control. They laughed, told stories, and Sarah felt a quiet happiness seeing these people who had been so broken now beginning to heal. Gabriel gave her a drawing he had made. It was a picture of the whole family together, including Sarah, all smiling under a bright yellow sun. In the corner, in his childish handwriting, he had written, "For Sarah, my hero." Sarah kept that drawing as her most precious treasure. She knew she would carry this experience with her for the rest of her life, not just as a story of courage, but as a reminder of the transformative power of truth, even when it hurts. Months later, Sarah learned through Robert that Mrs. Peterson was living with her cousin in Albany. She had started therapy, finally trying to process the traumas and patterns that had led her to act the way she did. Robert visited her occasionally, maintaining a safe distance, but not completely abandoning the woman who raised him. It was a complicated relationship, full of contradictions, but he was learning that true love sometimes means setting firm boundaries. Gabriel thrived, his health completely stabilized, with no more episodes, no more hospital stays. He went back to school full-time, made new friends, and developed an interest in science and astronomy. Robert was proud of his son's every achievement, actively participating in his life in a way he never had before. And Emily. She went through her own healing process, working through the guilt of having left Gabriel behind. But she also learned to forgive herself, understanding that she had done the best she could at the time with the emotional tools she had. She and Robert finally rekindled their relationship, but this time in a more mature, conscious, and balanced way. They renewed their wedding vows in a small intimate ceremony, with Gabriel as the ring bearer. Sarah was invited to the wedding and cried with emotion seeing that family finally truly united. During the reception, Emily pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being brave when no one else was. Thank you for saving my son. I just did what needed to be done, but thank you for letting me be a part of this journey." The story of that family would continue, of course. There would be more challenges, more difficult moments, more healing work ahead. But now they had something they didn't have before: truth, transparency, and freedom. Freedom to love without suffocating, to care without controlling, to live without the weight of hidden manipulations. And Sarah? She continued her career working with children, but now with a deeper wisdom about the complexities of family dynamics and the importance of trusting her own instincts. That experience at the Miller house had marked her forever, reminding her that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to expose the truth, even when that truth threatens to destroy everything before allowing something new and healthier to grow. In the end, there were no absolute villains or perfect heroes. There were only imperfect people trying to love the best way they knew how, and sometimes failing terribly in the process. But there was also redemption, there was healing, and there was hope. And those things, Sarah learned, are always stronger than any darkness we try to hide. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Sarah, Robert, Gabriel, and Emily has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of courage, truth, and family reconstruction, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this narrative resonated with you. The post. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul and showing that it's always possible to start over when we have the courage to face the truth. We'll see you in the next episode with a new story that will stir your emotions.